In the cruel autumn of 1885, the dust of Rattlesnake Gulch knew the silent, burning grief of Jack Hollister. He was 40 years old, and the life he had built, a simple, honest existence, was now nothing more than a ring of cold, fire-scarred stones and the memory of a wife's laugh and a child's bright voice. The perpetrators were the Iron Claws, a gang of 6 vicious riders led by the brutal Elias Thorne, who had seized control of every drop of potable water in the territory. They demanded more than just fealty. They demanded tribute, respect, and ownership of the spirits of the settlers. Jack had defied them once, refusing to hand over his last quarter sack of grain. One merciless afternoon, while Jack was 3 days out trapping beaver along the Salt River, the Iron Claws returned to collect their tax. When Jack finally rode back, the sunset was not painting the sky. It was the reflection of his blazing cabin. Martha, his wife, had tried to fight. He found her wedding ring melted into the bedrock of the hearth. His young son Samuel had vanished into the smoke. The subsequent weeks were a haze of primal animal survival. Jack didn't mourn. He simply broke. He didn't bury his dead. The fire had done the job too well. He dissolved into the harsh Mojave wastes, trading his identity for solitude and his grief for a brittle, sleepless vengeance. For 3 years, he drifted. The desert was his confessor and his tormentor. He learned to read the sun in the shadows, to find water where others saw only dry earth. His clothes became rags, his hair tangled and long, and his face grew thin, etched with lines of perpetual exhaustion and deep, unshed tears. He carried only a rusty, dull knife, a tool too insignificant for war, yet too intimate to discard. He lived in the gray space between living and haunting. The world was dead to him, reduced to a hostile, featureless plain. His purpose was gone, replaced by a single unacknowledged obsession, the Iron Claws. He didn't seek them, but he tracked the whispers of their depredations, listening to the terrified conversations in distant trading posts, hoarding information like water. He was a ghost wearing a man's skin, waiting for the precise moment when the veil between his shadow existence and the world of the living would tear. Part to the canyon's edge, and the spark that tear came in the form of a familiar sound. The sharp, cruel laugh of bullies, a sound that bypassed Jack's reasoning and struck directly at the raw, unhealed trauma in his soul. He had ridden into the miserable, sun-baked town of Canyon's Edge, a bottleneck of greed and desperation, only to resupply his meager jerky and water sacks. The Iron Claws, he learned, ran this place like their private fiefdom, shaking down merchants and terrorizing anyone who looked like they might put up a fight. In the dusty main street, 3 riders, wearing the distinctive tarnished spurs of the gang, had cornered Lena Vargo. Lena, a woman in her early 30s known for her sharp wit and even sharper card dealing at the Red Dog Saloon, stood defiant, though her knuckles were white. Thorne once double the usual take. Lena sneered a man named Jeb, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "Consider it a late fee for your pretty mouth." Lena spat a thin stream of dust onto his boot. "Thorne can kiss the devil's asphalt. Tell him to come get his own silver." The sight, the brute power, the calculated cruelty, the defenseless defiance, was a scene replay of the fire. The terror in his mind made flesh. The shattering force of the memory broke through Jack's 3 years of stoicism. He didn't think, he reacted. He was across the street in 2 staggering strides, moving with the unnatural speed of a man who has forgotten the weight of his own body. He shoved the largest rider, drawing the rusty knife he now carried. The sight of his haggard, spectral face and the wild, burning intensity in his eyes that held 3 years of death, was enough to momentarily freeze the seasoned thugs. "Get clear," Jack rasped, his voice a dry whisper from disuse. "Get clear of this." Jeb recovered first, drawing his pistol. "Who the hell are you, hobo? This ain't your fight." Jack didn't answer. He lunged, not aiming for a killing blow, but a distraction. He slashed Jeb's forearm, the rusty blade drawing blood and a howl of surprise and pain. The other 2, stunned by the sudden fierce violence from this phantom, hesitated long enough for Lena to kick dust into one man's face and draw a tiny pearl-handled derringer from her boot. Pop, a loud, sharp noise, and the 3rd Iron Claw stumbled, clutching his shoulder. "Run, you idiots," Jeb yelled, scrambling to remount. The 3 riders galloped away, leaving a smear of blood and confusion in the dirt. Lena Vargo turned to Jack, tucking the derringer away. She was breathing hard, but her eyes, the color of wet slate, were assessing, not grateful. "You look like hell, mister. But thanks for the distraction." "I didn't do it for you," Jack said, the words hurting his throat. "I don't want anyone else to taste the ash I lived on." She nodded, a cold understanding passing between them. "They work for Elias Thorne. He's the root. They're just the branches." Her voice was flat, hard, suggesting her own long, unforgiving history with the gang. "He's the one who put the spark to the kindling. He's the one who signs their pay and their death warrants." The cold understanding deepened into a silent pact. Jack's body had stopped wandering, but his soul was still homeless, anchored only by the possibility of settling an impossible debt. Lena, too, was a survivor, not a victim. She had been chipping away at the Ironclaw's enterprise from the inside, gathering information and draining their resources one crooked card game at a time. "Thorne never sleeps in town," Lena explained later, sharing a stale bottle of whiskey with Jack in the shadows behind the saloon. "He uses the Red Dog as his office, but he sleeps 3 miles out, in an old fortified shack by the abandoned quarry. He's paranoid. 1 sentry, maybe 2, never more." "And you know the hours?" Jack asked, his gaze distant, calculating. "He usually spends sundown counting the day's haul in his back booth at the saloon," she replied. "It's his ritual. He likes to see the money before he leaves." Their plan was simple, brutal, and utterly final. It wasn't about justice, it was about termination. Jack was the hammer, driven by the memory of the fire. Lena was the eyes and the wire, fueled by years of silent rage against the oppression. Lena, donning a velvet skirt and a look of practiced indifference, would slip into the Red Dog and confirm the location of Thorne. Jack, lurking outside, would wait for her signal. The moment Lena stepped through the saloon doors, the buzz of voices died down, replaced by the clink of glasses and the low hum of suspicion. Every man in the Red Dog knew Lena Vargo. She moved through the smoky room with the confidence of a queen, ignoring the leers and the heavy tension the Ironclaws maintained. She sidled up to the bar, ordered a tepid beer, and subtly scanned the room. The air was thick with cheap tobacco and stale sweat. Her gaze finally settled on the secluded velvet-draped booth in the rear. There, under the flickering light of an oil lamp, sat Elias Thorne. He wasn't counting money, but studying a detailed map of the territory, a map marking water lines and future claims. Thorne was a snake, calculating every coil. She took a long sip of her beer, catching the reflection of his heavy-set frame in the mirror behind the bar. He was indeed alone in the booth, his hand resting near a shotgun. Lena quickly finished her drink, dropped a silver coin, and walked out, her pace slow but deliberate. She found Jack leaning against a darkened hitching post, his face obscured by the brim of his dusty hat. "He's in the back booth, counting more than money," she confirmed, her voice low and steady. "He's planning expansion. He's leaving in 10 minutes, just before moonrise." They moved out of town immediately, melting into the darkening canyon trails. The trail to the shack was poorly marked and winding, designed to discourage unwelcome visitors. They moved with the synchronicity of 2 people who had spent their lives skirting danger. Jack, gaunt and silent, leading the way. Lena, quick and light-footed, watching their back trail. The shack materialized out of the gloom, a dark, squat silhouette against the rugged terrain. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney, just as Lena had predicted. A single, sleepy guard sat outside by a barrel fire, nursing a tin cup. Jack stopped, raising a hand. "Wait here. Thorne is mine. We're a team, Hollister," Lena whispered, her hand gripping the derringer. "I get the sentry, you get the target." He knew she was right. Hesitation would cost them everything. Jack gave a curt nod. Lena circled wide, moving like a desert fox. Jack watched the sentry, a burly man named Gus, shiver and yawn. A sharp, almost imperceptible thwack broke the silence, followed by a heavy, soft thud. Lena emerged from the darkness, wiping a small dark stain from the side of her dress with a bandana. "Concussion, not fatal. You won't wake up until dawn." Jack didn't pause to question her method. He approached the shack's heavy plank door. The silence inside was unnerving. He could smell wood smoke, stale tobacco, and a faint metallic scent, iron or blood. He placed his ear against the cold wood. Nothing. He kicked the door in, the sound echoing explosively in the night. Elias Thorne was standing by a small table, surprised but not disarmed. He was fully dressed, a shotgun resting on the table, pointed straight at the door. He was shorter than Jack remembered, but his eyes were still flat and dead. "Hollister," Thorne said, his voice a low growl, recognizing the specter who stood before him. "I thought the fire took care of you." Jack felt the 3 years of ash coagulate into a single blinding focus. "It took care of everything but me." Lena, positioned just behind the doorway, leveled her derringer at Thorne's chest. "Drop the gun, Thorne." Thorne ignored Lena, his focus locked on Jack. "That was business, Hollister. A tax that needed paying. Your wife resisted. Your boy, accidents happen in the dry season." The casual, dismissive cruelty was a physical blow. Jack didn't need the knife, he needed the truth. "Did you order the fire?" "I ordered the message," Thorne corrected, a flicker of something like pride in his dead eyes. "The message was, you pay or you burn. Your family chose the latter. It was their choice, not mine." This confirmation, years in the waiting, was the final weight that settled Jack's hand. The rusty knife was useless here. Jack moved. Thorne swung the shotgun up. Jack charged, knocking the weapon aside just as it roared, the buckshot tearing harmlessly into the wooden wall. The two men collided, the weight of Thorne, the wiry, desperate fury of Jack. They fell to the floor, overturning the table, the map fluttering to the ground. Jack was relentless, driven by a silent, screaming force. Thorne was powerful, a man accustomed to winning by sheer bulk. But Jack fought with nothing left to lose. He used his knees, his elbows and the jagged edge of his knife sheath. Thorne managed to land a blow that snapped Jack's head back, filling his vision with spots. As Thorne raised his arm for a final heavy swing, Lena's tiny derringer found its second, and final, target. Pop! Thorne gasped, a shallow, wet sound, and collapsed, his large body shuddering on the rough floorboards. Jack staggered back, his breath ragged, looking down at the root of his torment. It was done. There was no exhilaration, only a hollow silence where the roar of vengeance was supposed to be. He knelt, and slowly picked up the map. The lines marked water sources, but one location, Rattlesnake Gulch, was circled in red, a reminder, a trophy for the man who had ordered the blaze. Lena stood over him, reloading the single barrel of her tiny pistol with steady hands. "It's over, Jack. We need to ride now." Jack Hollister stared at the map, then at his bloody hands. The man who had entered the Mojave Wastes 3 years ago was finally truly dead. The man who stood now was something else, a revenant, anchored to the world not by grief, but by a chilling, renewed purpose. He stood up, turning his back on the ashes of his past, finally ready to face the desert, not as an exile, but as a man with a future, however uncertain, alongside the woman who had helped him claim it. They left the shack to the growing darkness, two lone shadows moving toward the rising moon.